Let's put everything together and see what we need to create a Spring Boot application. We'll be creating a really simple application, a Hello World application. For this, we will need 3 files. The first one is the pom.xml, where we're going to define all our dependencies. We'll be using the starter dependencies that we have seen. We'll be showing Maven here, but you can also use Gradle or Ant. The second file will be the application.properties. We'll use that file to define properties that are understood by a Spring Boot to configure specific parts of the application. And the last file will be the entry point, the application class, the class that will contain the main method and where we're going to create the application context. The best way to get started and to create a Spring Boot application is by using the Spring Initializer. You can see it at start.spring.io. It's a simple form where you're going to fill in some details and this will create a zip file containing your application. The good thing about the initializer is that it's open source. If you go to github.com/spring.io/initializer, you'll see the source code, you can fork it and create your own initializer with your own dependencies. So the value of the initializer is that it will create the structure of your application. You can select whether you want a Maven or a Gradle project, and this will create all the structure of your application so you can get started easy. It will also define all the dependencies in your POM file or build.gradle. You'll be selecting the dependencies you want, and those are going to be added into your files. So that's going to be really handy because it's going to allow us to get started without taking care of the project structure. The Spring Initializer is also used inside your IDE. If you use your IDE to create a Spring project, either in Spring Tools or Eclipse or IntelliJ, this will connect to the Spring Initializer, download the zip file, expand it, and you'll see the project inside your IDE. If you take a look at the POM file, inside the POM file, we'll see the parent POM file, as we have already seen. That's going to be the Spring Boot starter parent. That's where you're going to define the version of a Spring Boot. And then the dependencies, we'll be using the starter dependencies. If you select, for instance, JDBC in the Spring Initializer, you'll get the Spring Boot starter JDBC in your POM file. We'll also get other dependencies, like, in that case, HSQLDB, because we'll be using an in-memory database. If you scroll down a little bit more, you'll see the Spring Boot Maven plugin, the one that allows us to package our application as a jar file. We'll be using that to create a fat jar and run the application with java-jar. So that's our POM file. The second file will be the application.properties. When you create the application structure with the Spring Initializer, there will be an application.properties inside the class path, which will be completely empty. We're going to add these next properties, the logging.level.root. We're going to define that the log level should be error. And we'll also define the spring.sql.init.schema locations and a spring.sql.init.data locations properties. Those will execute against the data source. Just because we have a Spring JDBC in the class path and HSQLDB, Spring Boot will create an in-memory database, we'll have a data source available, and we'll run these two SQL files against that data source. We'll create a schema and populate the data source with some data. Now, the third file will be the entry point of the application. That's going to be a class, in our case, this application class, annotated with the Spring Boot application. Remember that the Spring Boot application is a configuration class, it's doing component scanning, and it's also enabling auto configuration. Notice how in the main method, we use this Spring application.run method to create the application context. We are passing this class, application.class, and the arguments, and this will create the Spring application. Now, we can create other beans in this class because this is a configuration class, and we'll be defining something of type command line runner. This will execute when the application context is created. We'll be passing or injecting the JDBC template, which will be automatically created by a Spring Boot because we have the JDBC dependencies in the class path, and we'll be using the JDBC template to query the database. We'll be querying how many accounts we have in the database, so we'll have in the log something like, hello, there are X accounts in our database. So now we just need to package the application. We'll be using Maven package to create the jar file. Remember that this creates two jars. The first one will be the Uber jar, and the second one will be the original jar, which contains only your classes. We'll be using the Uber jar to bootstrap the application with java-jar. So now we can type java-jar, hello app, and this will print, hopefully, hello, there are 21 accounts in the console. because that will go to the database, use the JDBC template, and print that in the console. Everything is configured, auto-configured. We haven't configured any beans in the application context, just the command line runner. Really helpful. All the auto configuration has kicked in and configured the missing parts of the application. And this is how we get started with the Spring Boot. In this module, in this section, we have seen a little bit about the Spring Boot. We have seen how Spring Boot simplifies the development and some of the features of a Spring Boot, like the dependency management, the auto configuration, packaging, and the testing integration testing with the Spring Boot. We have also seen how to package that as a jar file, and we've done a really quick start into Spring Boot. In the next modules, we'll deep dive in Spring Boot and we'll learn a little bit more about it.